All right, welcome back to the dungeon where we geek out on all things horror, thriller, mystery, and suspense. And this time we're dipping into a bit of sci fi as well. So we have a double guest this time. We have a returning guest, Vincenzo Natali. You were on you were in the dungeon about almost a year ago now, talking about your graphic
God, has it been
novel.
that long?
Yeah, it was
To feel it.
August of last year. Uh, no, June. Yeah, what's the 6 month? What's the 6 month of the
Scary.
year? June.
June.
June. Yeah. Okay. So
It was
yeah.
June. Yeah, you're right. It was June. Early
So,
June, probably.
talking about tech. So so now that you're back here, I was could you give us like an update on that? Is that thing's out in the streets now, right? I'm assuming.
It's yes, it's out on the streets. Hopefully, in the hands of a few people that might actually read it. But you can get it at Amazon or pretty much anywhere. And it's out in the world
Okay, great,
for your reading pleasure.
great. And I know I had fun reading it. So we're talking about we're talking about Splice this time. Both the movie and now what a decade two decades later that the book's coming out, novelization about it. But I mean for you, I'm just going to call you Mr. Natali because I'm going to keep fucking up your first name and your last name.
I like Mr. Natali. I don't get that very often.
Well, you got to respect your elders, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
anyway, tell me about this mouse.
Sure.
This weird mouse that you were introduced to, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a movie that came from a mouse, but not just any mouse. It was this thing called the Vacanti mouse, which once you've seen it, you'll never forget it because it was a mouse with what appeared to be a human ear growing out of its back. And it was a MIT experiment where they were actually, I think they were growing cartilage underneath a mouse's skin, so as a prosthesis. And it was a nude mouse. It had no hair, but it looked like it had a human ear on its back. And the image was so shocking to me. And the mouse was so vulnerable looking. I just knew that there was a story to be told. And from that grew Splice.
Okay.
Although the mouse did not make it into the picture. The mouse does not make an appearance in Splice. But the idea of genetic science and all the very strange, exotic, and frightening possibilities that lies within were very intriguing to me. And especially just the human relationship that is involved between geneticists who's creating something like that and their experiment was very interesting to me. And ultimately, I would say that Splice is a relationship story.
Right. So and the movie stars Adrian Brody as one of the geneticists, and Sarah Pauli, I think it is.
Yeah.
And then I hope I'm going to try to pronounce this one. Delphine Cheniak?
It's Delphine Cheniak, yeah.
Okay. And she plays Dren, or at least the adult version of Dren. And then we have Abigail Chu play the child Dren.
What we were trying to do was rather ambitious and outside of the box. And every step of the way with this film, from its conception through to the production, through the post, to the release and everything, the worst possible things had to happen in order for the best possible results. Like the movie is like the creature Dren. You just you keep thinking it's dying, and then it would somehow come back to life, and even in an even more extraordinary form than it started in. And so, as an example, when we finished shooting the film, you would think, well, okay, you made it through the movie, so how hard can it be? Well, when our visual effects supervisor re-budgeted the film based on the first cut, he realized we were $7 million over budget in visual effects alone.
Just a visual, okay.
And this is a $26 million film, so which is a healthy budget for an independent film, but for the kind of creature movie we were making, with the ambitions that we had, where the creature is a character in the film, not just something lurking in the shadows. It was really ambitious, and so when I found out, it was tough. And when you make an independent film, the way they're financed is you can't ask for more money. It's just a certain amount of money you get, because you're piecing together your budget from all these different territories that you're selling the film to. So there's no studio to go to and say, hey, we need a little more money. Even if there was, they wouldn't be able to give it to you, because the way that financing is structured, you can't take more money. So we just had to we had to squeeze the round peg into the square hole. And it was a slow and excruciating process. And in fact, the film the thing that saved us actually was that it had extremely long post-production. We had a 14-month post-production on Splice. And what that permitted us to do was to use a smaller group of visual effects artists, but spread their work over a longer period of time. It just meant that we got more bang for our buck, and then we could be really fastidious with the visual effects. But it was down to pixels practically, like frames. Every frame had a dollar value associated with it. So, I was literally getting every single frame I could into the movie, and just barely getting the bare minimum of what we needed to tell the story.
Wow. So yeah, talked about stringing it out quite a bit.
Well, as a story, like another example of the resurrection of Splice is we finished the film in 2009, just in time for the global financial collapse. So at that moment, no one was really buying movies for the United States. And we didn't have, our original US distributor went bankrupt. So we had to find a distributor, and you can't really sell a movie anywhere unless you have that American sale. So it was just kind of the movie was just sort of sitting there. And then MGM had a little bit of interest. And Gaumont, who produced the movie, is a French studio, just was really slow making the deal. And I kept pushing him and saying, look, you got to make this deal. This movie's going to go straight to DVD. But they were very slow. And MGM went out of business. They went bankrupt. So then Sony showed interest. And I was like, guys, you've got to sell this movie. And by some miracle, we got into Sundance. And I was like, look, if you don't sell this film to Sony, once we premiere at Sundance, anything could happen. Like, you don't know how people are going to respond to this film. This is not like an obvious success. This could go the other way. So you've got to sell this film to Sony. They would not sell the film to Sony. The movie premiered at Sundance, and by some bizarre miracle, Joel Silver, who is a very well-known producer, having produced the Matrix movies and the Lethal Weapon movies and the Die Hard movies and so on, saw the film, and although he has never acquired a movie before, ever, he wanted Splice. And so he bought it for his shingle at Warner Brothers, Dark Castle. And so all of a sudden, after almost a year of trying to sell the movie, we were suddenly at Warner Brothers with a 2,000 screen release. So it was Splice, this is like a pattern that the film had. It would be excruciating, but then in the end, the best possible thing would happen. And one of the best possible things is that Claire has written the novelization. It's a fantastic adaptation, and never in my wildest imaginings did I think that my movie Splice, 15 years on from its release, would have a novelization. It's incredible.
Yes, and that's where Claire comes in. So Claire, well, let me pull up your deets here.
Oh my God, not my deets.
Your deets, your yeets. I'll just. This is from the press release from the book. And it says that you are the online branch director of the Miskatonic Institute of Horror Studies.
Yes, it's my patriotic duty to promote them right now. So the Miskatonic Institute of Horror Studies, we are often understandably mistaken for like a Lovecraft-specific institute. We are a little group of passionate volunteers who run a monthly lecture series starring various industry veterans and intellectuals speaking on all things horror. My guest in April was Vincenzo, actually, who gave this really incredible talk on how architecture in horror cinema is embedded with all sorts of human neuroses and phobias and things like that, and it was predictably excellent. In May, I'm going to have this guy, David J. Goodwin, who did an incredible amount of original research on Lovecraft's time in New York City, which is something we almost never talk about, because you think Lovecraft and then you hear the epitaph on his tombstone, I am Providence. And perhaps you also think about how he's, this flamboyant bigot, but he spent a couple of years in New York City when he was just beginning to get a sense of his own artistic identity. And David Goodwin kind of proves, I think, that his time, I'm in Brooklyn, his time here in New York really molded him into the type of storyteller that we all know him as. So that's the type of thing that we do here. Okay. I have given a few of my own Miskatonic lectures, one on kind of the story behind the story of the Amityville Horror, and one on the story behind the story of the movie The Entity with Barbara Hershey, which is like an excruciatingly difficult film about a woman who believes or actually is being sexually assaulted by a supernatural presence. So my curiosity is really about films that are marketed somehow as being a true story. And what does that mean? And why does it convince us? And why is it so enticing? I'm permitting myself to get into that a little bit, which may feel digressive because I'm not really a fiction writer, or I haven't been so far. But I kind of randomly got invited to do the Splice novelization, and I thought, I have something to say about this for sure. When I watch movies and when I write about them, I'm really thinking about the psychological content, which may feel a little bit old school for some people, but, it's like a film almost is like a psychic phenomenon. It's giving you like a three-dimensional, sensorial, subjective experience of what it's like to be somebody else. And that's very appealing to me. And Splice tells a really incredibly difficult interpersonal story. I think in a way, when Splice came out, people were not ready for it. And I tend to experience that people are kind of still not ready for it, which is incredible because we live in a time of button pushing, right? Oh, yeah. And it's, it's tricky because it's exciting viscerally. It's gross, it's scary, it has several different versions of a really great creature, and it is just destined to make you uncomfortable. But it's also uncomfortable in the way that like family psychodramas are. There's a lot of stuff about divorce, and there's a lot of stuff about kind of the specter of child abuse and the specter of incest and things that people are generally not expecting to be confronted by with like an escapist science fiction fantasy. And so I think Splice really kind of like got in people's faces, and I think it still does, actually. And I was really delighted to be part of I don't know, some sort of extension of what Vincenzo was trying to deliver with this bizarre story that I think still is very affecting.
Mm. Now, I'm assuming at the very least you were given access to like the screenplay, because as I was reading it, it was like, because I watched the movie first, and then I read your novelization. It was like, okay, I damn near verbatim. I was like, okay, I remember this scene. I recognize this scene. Okay, I recognize these lines of dialogue and stuff like that. So, was there anything else that materials that you were given to kind of flesh this story out?
Yeah, I think that actually it's on Vincenzo Natali's website that probably there's like a late. Well, I wouldn't know if it's late. There's a certain version of the script that's fairly familiar if you're familiar with the movie. So let me put it this way. Like, I had an interview with Mike Gingold at Fangoria about this. And, he asked me the obvious question that you're asking me, did you have access to material that maybe didn't make it into the movie? And I think that what you find is that if you read the book, it's fairly true to exactly what happens on the screen, but I felt like my job was to really submerge you in the atmosphere, the psychological and emotional atmosphere, like what's being implied by what happens in this movie. Because what's really amazing about Splice, it's like when you do a horror movie or a science fiction movie or some combination thereof, I think you're expected to be explicit. And especially if you're doing an FX movie, which this firmly is, you're expected to be like really explicit. And Splice is full of all this kind of subtlety and all this sort of like what's not being said between these people is even more powerful than what they really are saying to each other. So one of the things that's in the script that I read that I absolutely stole and put in the book is this idea that so you have Clive and Elsa, and I would assume that anyone watching this podcast will get why they have those names, who are having this kind of tricky relationship. It's sort of a marital relationship. Like, they seem really devoted to each other, but nobody ever addresses like how formal or legal this is exactly. And it becomes really clear that somewhat contrary to the stereotypes, the guy is having major parenthood urges, and he doesn't want to miss his window to do this. And the girl, for some reason that she's not really saying, is hesitant about this. And there's this great sequence in the script where, there's going to be a love scene. And you're like, great. And then it's like she has to go to the bathroom and get spermicide and a sponge and a condom and all this stuff. And it's this whole procedure that he has to be patient with and has sort of learned to, deal with. And I thought this is so incredibly telling. It gives you so much information about her and what her identity is and what her hopes are for the future and what her fears are about the future. So I put that in really explicitly, and it actually laid a lot of groundwork for the way that I kind of discuss Elsa's inner life, which I think is a huge part of the book. Another thing that's in the book that just seems like this little, that's in the script, that just seems like this little detail that didn't make it into the movie, but to me it was like, I know who these people are. On their off time, they're doing designer psychedelic drugs and going to clubs. And I'm like, I know these people. These are super advanced, high-functioning autistic people who have sort of carved their own niche into a super niche industry already and are following their own vision of the future and are perhaps not sure what to do when human tradition and sentimentality interferes with what they think should be so obvious about where we're headed and what's going to be good for everybody. So there are no events in in the novel that don't take place in the film, but I do think that when you'll read it, it should almost be like a VR version of the movie. Like, oh, I didn't know this was there. I didn't know what this felt like. I didn't know what this smelled like. I didn't know what kind of like pheromonal anxiety is being transmitted between the people who are on the screen. When I read this thing, I was really like living in it. Every day I'm putting Splice on. I wonder how many times I've seen it in its entirety. And I'm watching like 3 or 4 minutes at a time and thinking about body language and what would cause somebody to act like this. You know, things like this only work if you infuse them with a lot of empathy. You're like really going after, like, how do these people feel? Why do they act like this? And I really hope that all of that emotional, tough stuff is in there. And you know, it's tough, but hopefully it's not cynical, right? Like it still invites some kind of sympathy, even though there are no easy answers.
I know one of the things, I mean, right off the bat, it's like the one thing that really hooked me into the book was because when you think about it, these genetic engineers are essentially playing God, and your whole at the very beginning, because like the one of the first scenes is the birth of one of these things, and you take it from the perspective of this new life form that they created, and it's calling the basically it's calling the humans the others, and it's but the hook that really grabbed my corner of my mouth that pulled me in was you describe it as sort of like this. Okay, there's at one point there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there was oh Christ, it's been a few days since I read the book, but
let's be fair,
like,
it's very hard to repeat.
Yeah, it's like, okay, and then there was light, and then there was sensation, and then there was pain, and then so that kind of harkened me back to the beginning of the Bible. How God is just kind of moving across the oceans and stuff like that, and then there was land, and then there was light, and then there was stuff like that. So it has a very a biblical beginning of just setting the tone. It's like, okay, we're playing God here. So
it's so funny. What you're saying is so obvious, and it's not what I was thinking about.
Really?
Yeah, no, the idea, the notion of playing God is like at the epicenter of any Frankenstein story, right? But I'm really happy that worked for you, and I'm very amused that you're like adding something to it that I actually wasn't considering. The way it worked for me, I'm watching the movie, and Vincenzo has this gorgeous credit sequence that's like this tour of the entrails of something that is going to spit out, Fred or Ginger, one of these proto creatures. And it was not necessary. The movie doesn't mandate that I tell the experience of Fred or Ginger, the little proto creatures. I could have just gone straight to, here are Clive and Elsa, and here they are doing their main thing in the lab, and this is how you're going to meet them and find out what their business is. But it's this POV thing with the creature being born, and I just decided that I really wanted to do that. And I think the reason I wanted to do it so much was because I'm really interested in consciousness. I'm really interested in, like, what we perceive and how we perceive it, and how it becomes this kind of personal. I mean, it informs the personality, right? And then it's like you take in stimulus from the outside world, and it gets processed in your unique, deeply internal machinery. And then the challenge of being alive is like, can I convey any of this to another person? If I try to say what it's like to be me, will anyone ever understand it? What is it even about? If there were no contrasts, you wouldn't even know you were alive. I once heard this thing, I don't know how anyone would know this, but I enjoy it. I once heard this thing that babies, like infants, don't know that there's any difference between themselves. They don't know that there's a me and a you. There's just me. There's this like monolithic consciousness that encompasses everything. So it's not like I'm hungry and you have to feed me. It's like there's just hunger.
Okay.
So to me, this creature that's being born, the way that it realizes that it's a unique entity is because of these contrasts. Like I have limits. I'm located here and not there. I feel this and not that. Oh, there's other things, and they probably feel things that I can't even imagine. And so, you know, we never have another scene in the book ever that's told from the point of view of Fred or Ginger, one of these little protean entities. But in a way that kind of introduces what I'm trying to do with everything else. Like, what is it like to be Clive that Elsa doesn't know? You know, what is it like to be Elsa that she feels like she can't tell Clive, or even if she does tell him, he's not going to understand it. And this leads up to me having to tell what it's like to be Dren. You know, I learned sort of the hard way that when you're writing a screenplay that's like a complicated interaction between multiple characters, somebody, not unfairly, is going to say, whose story is this? Who's the hero? The hero can't be everybody unless you're a genius or something, right? And I was like, well, the hero in here is still everybody. I'm just going to have to extra earn it. And earning it, I think, with Clive and with Elsa was not so hard because Vincenzo gives you so many reasons to feel this empathy for them and to have a sense of the boundary of their privacy and how much they love each other and where that butts up against what they can't give each other. And like, why is that? But I knew that I was going to have to tell it from Dren's point of view at some point, and I was extremely worried about it because nobody knows what it's like to be a bizarre creature. Not this bizarre, anyway. We all have some similarities with the people around us, even if they're just the most cursory and superficial. And so I knew that speaking in her voice would have to be sort of primitive and sort of affectedly different from normal human thought processes. But I didn't want it to be like cute or condescending. I was really worried about getting that right. And when Vincenzo told me that he liked it, it was like the biggest relief of my life, probably. I was very prepared to have to rework that.
But I was so happy you did it, partly because long ago when the film, just before it was coming out, I started to work on a comic book adaptation. And I had a really great artist working on it, but it was just overwhelming for him. So we abandoned it, but it was written from Dren's point of view. So, because I just think, if you're going to adapt something like in a different medium, why not do it in a different way? So I was so happy. It was like that idea that never was able to see the light of day was then appeared in your book was wonderful.
Well, I mean,
only a book can do that, right? Like it's very hard.
Right.
Sorry. But with a non-verbal character like Dren, it's very hard to get inside her head in a movie. I'm sure it's hard to do in a book too, but at least a book allows you that ability to enter her mind.
I mean, I think that you there's quite a lot of her as sort of as a person in that movie. It almost would have been a ripoff if I just wrote her as this sort of object somewhere who's orbiting Clive and Elsa, and they're just reacting to her. I mean, Delphine infuses that character with quite a lot of psychology, and I think your FX artists also did quite a lot of acting on the screen. And it just almost wouldn't have been fair, and I just, because a lot of the movie is what's happening to her and how she feels about it. So I watch a lot of horror movies, obviously, many of them are behind me. And the other thing that I watch quite a lot of are melodramas and Lifetime movies, and just obsessed with them. Whether it's like Douglas Sirk level, like genius melodramas, or kind of like made-for-TV psychodramas about family existence. That's like my bread and butter. And Splice, I think this maybe is part of the reason I felt really motivated about writing Splice because it was like a union of those two things. And so Dren is like embodying, in some ways, even in families where the parents really love the child, they may not fully see the child as a unique entity. And when the child is starting to become an adult and have its own style and its own sexuality and its own privacy and all of these things, like that can be really hard, even for really well-meaning parents. And I think Splice is really, really loaded with that. Like every minute, and especially something about the compression of the timeline for Dren. Like you see her move from being an infant to sort of like a 20-year-old or something. But it's all really sincere. It all works. It's convincing. And I really wanted to be able to like speak for this character and whatever. I'm glad it worked. I'll say one other thing about this that I told Vincenzo, not all of my sources of inspiration or cinematic or something. I really based Dren on this thing I saw on the street one day. I was working in an art gallery and hosting an opening, and I stepped outside, and there was a young woman with a little tiny puppy, like a really young puppy, and they were out on the sidewalk, and the woman had poured there was a huge amount of openly accessible kibble between them. And the little puppy is not moving a muscle. And the woman just will wait. And then she makes some gesture, something. And the dog goes, okay, it's time. And the dog will have a polite amount of kibble and then sit again and wait. I was like, this is like magic. How are you doing this? I mean, I don't understand anything about animal training anyway, but the point is not so much how does she control the animal. I mean, that's an interesting question. But the point is what does the puppy think is happening, right? And here's the thing. The puppy is learning cause and effect. But cause and effect requires an understanding of time. To understand cause and effect, you have to understand that there's a now and there's a later. And later is like an intellectual concept. You never actually directly experience later. You just believe that it's going to happen. And so for me, I'm like, how can I describe the evolution of consciousness? The evolution of the development of the sense that you're a unique thing and you have decisions to make and challenges to meet. And something really simple is how does Dren know that there's a later? She's being deprived now, or she's being hurt or scared now, or left alone now. She somehow becomes sophisticated enough to know that there's a later. So this type of armchair psychology is an important structure in the book. And I think if you think about it, you might remember times of your life that you were learning these high-level concepts and what they did for your ability to navigate the world.
Yeah. Now, Vincenzo, you had brought up something that brought a question to my mind, because I don't script these things. I just pull things out of my butt of whatever I think, however the conversation's going. But so you make it, and there's all these things about rebooting and remaking movies and stuff like that. With the wealth of information and just the stuff that Claire has in her books, is can you pinpoint something that you didn't think was going to be in a movie or didn't intentionally put in a movie, but something that Claire espoused upon in the novelization that was like, okay, if we remake this movie, I'm gonna stick that stuff in here. Overtly show it on the screen.
For the Splice remake. I don't. What Claire did that was really special were the kinds of things you couldn't put in a movie. So everything she's talking about, and what I love about the book is that while it's very faithful to what's on the screen, it goes into the past, the history, and the thought processes of these characters in such tremendous depth. And there's obviously been a lot of research as well in terms of science and biology and that gives it a kind of credibility that is really, really impressive. But mostly, I feel like it's that we're getting inside, particularly Elsa's background, but also Clive's too. In fact, I even wondered, it's funny because I did, in the making of the film, I wrote histories for them, for the actors, so that, they would kind of know how Clive and Elsa met and what their families are like and so on. Now it's like, did Claire read that somehow? Because there are things in her book that were like secret history of Clive and Elsa that somehow she intuited or recreated. It was really cool. So, yeah, I think, sometimes things are just, there's obviously a synergy here, right? Like, Claire gets the movie in a way that probably very few people do. It really comes across in the writing of the book. The other thing I'd like to say about it is, again, you can't really do in a movie. I think that she has I'm very sensitive to prose in books. Like if something's not well written, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard for me. But Claire's prose is very beautiful, and there's a kind of poetry to it, but it's a poetry that comes from a somewhat clinical, dispassionate perspective.
Yeah.
Like there's a writer that sorry.
It's Claire, your writing is very meaty, but it's very easy to read. It flows very well.
It's important to be entertaining, right? And it's important to love what you're writing, which is an immediate thing. It's not some distance discipline thing. It's that people can just tell when you love what you did.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not so much, there's not very much you can do to plan that, right? Mm. It has to have the juice. I don't know how else to put it. Vincenzo, I really want to know what writer you were about to mention.
Oh, I was going to mention J.G. Ballard.
Oh my God, you're killing me. Of course.
But he has, in the way that there's like, he's the writer, most famously probably of Empire of the Sun, which was adapted by Steven Spielberg, but also Crash, which David Cronenberg made into a movie. But he has a way of describing like really freaky stuff, but in this very detached way. Almost, he used to write technical manuals for medicine. So, but they're kind of poetic at the same time. So it's this weird, but I think like really sexy combination of being somewhat distant and clinical and also lyrical at the same time. And that Claire can do that. It's very unique. And so that I really think the quality of the writing of the book too, like just her talent as a wordsmith and as somebody with a very distinct voice is really impressive.
God, there's so many things I want to say. You're really like killing me right now. I love Cronenberg. He's like my guy. I'm not as well read as a person might expect, or I'm well read in like a certain kind of compulsive way that's not the normal path for people who read, I think. Ballard, I love. My favorite thing with Ballard is I can't remember the name of the story. I think it's not Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan, but I'm going to say because it's such an incredibly great title for anything. I think it's a different story. It's maybe like 2 pages long. It's a short one about Ronald Reagan, where Reagan gets sick and the country is so obsessed with him, like so in love in a way that it sort of combines like the love of Leave It to Beaver with the love of like overheated eroticism. There's this intense fixation on Reagan. And so they start to do whoever would do this, the country starts to broadcast live readings of what's happening with all of his internal organs. So it's like a fireside chat, but from inside the body of Ronald Reagan. And it's just 2 pages of the description of the evolution of just sort of the fireside chat of, Ronald Reagan's liver or kidneys and the sort of, homey folksy dialogue between American citizens about how Reagan's kidneys are doing today or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I so was in writing this book so driven by just trying to be convincing about what it would be like to have to live this story. And I'm not a science person. I think of myself as kind of a dummy, actually, but but I can care about, like, how do I communicate what I perceive? And so there would be these scenes where I would have to just freeze the frame and be like, what's that, and what's that, and what's that, and what's that? And then I got extraordinarily good at Googling, like, obscure science equipment and what it is and exactly what it does. There probably is a little bit too much of that in the book, but I spent hours and hours just starting with a visual description and finding out about what happens in some whole procedure or other. And then Vincenzo does this really interesting thing where, like, it's this sexy sci-fi horror movie, and it starts in a lab where you would absolutely expect it to start. And then it moves out into this primordial nature where there's an ancient barn, and the ancient barn is also the basis of Elsa's whole ancestry and her whole dark history that's intergenerational. I mean, it's really, really an interesting thing for a science fiction movie to do, like, at all. But we get into the pasteurization barn, and I'm like, well, fuck, what's in a pasteurization barn? It's time for me to find out how the fucking vat works and how the dedicated sidewall works. Well, how do they irrigate this thing? I don't know. And I had this experience. I'm like a Tumblr lifer, which I probably shouldn't admit, but it was really helpful to me because sometimes I just would have to freeze a frame because I'm going to have to describe barn anatomy. I gotta say, Dren's on this thing, and she does a thing with a thing. I gotta, like, say what it is. So I'm taking these, like, weird freeze frames where you can barely tell what's happening. It's kind of perverted looking, and I'm like, what's that? Can any of my farm people, like, tell me what that is? And then I would crowdsource the answer. It's like, oh, that's a hay trolley. Here's how it works. And then once I have the vocabulary, I can look up, like, the historical identity of the hay trolley and what it does and everything, and then I'm, like, satisfied that I'm not just being, like, vague and trying to blow past things, because I think another thing that's cool about Splice, it has this dichotomy between, like, primordial bestial animalism and futuristic, dystopian, like, cyberpunky sexiness. And it also has this kind of a, oh my God, I got myself all wound up. What was I even talking about? I don't know if I can finish saying what I was saying. I'm so sorry, you guys. It's nice of you to listen to me.
It's all making so much sense.
As long as it's working for everybody. But yeah, whatever. Right, I know what I was going to say. Like, it's high concept, right? It's like monsters and science and these kind of elevated, bizarro, semi-psychedelic fantasies. And then it also still is, like, reminding you all the time, like, well, you're still rooted in the body and there's nothing you can do about that. So you better get ready. You better have an active relationship to your body that's not hostile, or else you're fucked. And I think Splice is really full of that, and the movement into the barn and just, like, the way things smell and feel and taste, and how the climate works on you. All these things that you would be protected from in a lab environment suddenly are, like, really in your face. Like, nature is not missing from Splice, and that's really cool. It's something you can't do with, an excellent product like Alien. You can't really talk about nature, or you could only imagine it in some way.
Now, Claire, do you have a certain passage from the book that you would like to
Yes,
read?
I do.
Okay.
I should have asked you how long you would like me to read for, but I think this will be reasonably brisk, and I would like to make a dedication. Wouldn't it be great if I had a bubble pipe or something? I should have prepared for this. The trade dress for this is so beautiful. I just picked one of the two versions, but at no time this evening have I said that the guys from Encyclopocalypse Publications are So nice.
Yes.
They're so passionate. They really do it for love. I mean, you can only do something like this for love, but but sometimes things get neurotic, and it's not neurotic with them. They really, really care, and they really pump you up. And I just have had the most incredibly positive experience every single second working with them. It's sort of funny. I'm going to digress for a moment, but I have the book in my hand, so I won't forget what I'm supposed to do.
Okay.
I grew up in a family of like intellectual ex-hippies who were extremely nervous about the brain rotting capacity of the screen, and especially my immediate and obvious interest in horror was like not well received in the house. We have since reconciled. But anyway, my father is a really brilliant guy and a really brilliant writer. And someone I have a great relationship with. However, he did tell me once that he said, Eraserhead is exactly what it's like to be a new parent. It's like, Jesus. I guess I know what I'm going for is Halloween. Like, for Halloween, thanks, Dad. So this one goes out to my dad. Hopefully this will make him laugh. These are new glasses. I don't know if I can, handle them. All right, let's see how this goes. Clive pushed a mop across the floor of the storage room as Elsa anxiously monitored Dren's fever. He was amazed by how quickly he descended from science superstar to janitorial staff, but he certainly preferred his job to Elsa's. She hovered over a gurney where the squirming patient lay swaddled in surgical scrubs. The bundle emitted a disturbing melange of animal sounds, the cries of a baby, the cockroach-like hiss, and that satanic bleating, all overlapping unnaturally. Clive didn't know how Dren did it, but he wished she would stop. Elsa squinted at the thermometer. It's 105. This is serious. You don't know that for sure. I know, okay? We have to do something. What? Clive grunted dismissively, letting the mop clatter to the floor. What are we supposed to do? Dren coughed wetly, her nose and mouth coated in congealing mucus. With her all rolled up like a big cigar, Clive couldn't help thinking of the Eraserhead baby. He stifled a bitter laugh as he remembered its reluctant father saying to his deformed, poxy infant, "Oh, you are sick." Well, we have to take her somewhere. Elsa was flailing, irrational with worry. What? That's crazy. Well, then do something. Clive gestured at their dungeon-like surroundings and shrugged sarcastically. Like what? Give her a Tylenol? His rebuttal slid right off Elsa. Telling her off may have felt good, but it wasn't doing him any favors. Whether or not this absurd situation should be happening was beside the point. It was happening. They had to do something, and they had to do it together, much as he would prefer to walk out the door, pretend the whole sad affair had never taken place, and start life over somewhere else. He ran his fingers through his hair and expelled the breath he'd been holding. We're biochemists. We can handle this, he said, as much to himself as to his grotesque family. Well, how? Elsa cried as she struggled to soothe her ailing ward. Dren's fussing rose to an agonized squeal. Fuck! How? Clive held steady. Well, what do you do for a fever? Cold bath. He blasted frigid water into the slop sink. It wasn't exactly clean, but it would have to do. He gripped the hose, willing the basin to fill faster as Dren croaked and shrieked. Boy, is she going to hate this. Shh, it's okay, sweetie, come on. Clive and Elsa unwrapped the unwilling creature, who suddenly seemed stronger than ever. You got her? Okay, it's okay. Gripping her tightly by the arms and legs, they plunged Dren into the icy bath. She unleashed an otherworldly wail that Clive was sure would bring the entire building down on their heads. She thrashed against her captors, dousing them in freezing water and threatening to break free, and then she began to seize and convulse. She coughed and wheezed, her tongue protruding from her mouth as her eyes rolled back in their sockets. Jesus, her passages are closing, Elsa gasped in horror, clutching Dren's face. She can't breathe. Do something. What? I don't know. Clive was paralyzed. He watched helplessly as the love of his life crumbled over the monstrosity that had torn their happiness to pieces. Pity and loathing formed a noxious emulsion in his gut. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind, not the least of which was the persistent desire to escape. Tracheotomy in the lab. There's no time, Elsa cried. Look at her, she's dying. Clive spun like a top, scanning the storage shelves for anything that could bring an end to this nightmare. He hated Elsa then, and he couldn't stand to fail her. He had already failed his brother, and he had long since failed himself. Dren, look at me, look right at me. Good girl, Elsa begged as Dren continued to suffocate. Try to breathe. I want you to look at me, look right at me. Elsa's voice grew muffled and distant in Clive's ears. Suddenly, he couldn't even hear Dren's desperate splashing. His eyes went funny, and he was pleasantly deafened by the sound of his blood pulsing in his ears. Oh, I see what's going on. I'm having a panic attack, he thought, with all the emotion of a man realizing that his car needs an oil change. The world seemed to pull comfortingly away from him, as if he were falling into a deep, dark well. A sort of anesthetized clarity settled over him. That's what it is. It's panic. I can't take this anymore. It's just going to have to stop, that's all. I'll just stop it. I know what to do. I think that's the end of when I read it to someone else before. I'm doing the voices.
That's good.
Really well.
Well, I've seen the movie so many times. It's like I have this almost inappropriate sense of intimacy. I have this weird experience now. I was going to tell you this where Vincenzo, Adrian Brody has been doing some really interesting things lately. And once in a while I see him in an ad for something on HBO and I go, oh, Adrian Brody, my buddy's doing something cool. Adrian Brody? Don't tell Sarah Polly I think I know her.
He is surprisingly similar.
Yeah, I think I know everyone involved. I think I know David Hewlett, who I thought was so good in your episode of Captain of Curiosities.
It was a family affair.
Well, the book comes out on August 20th, 2024. Now, the movie itself is available for rent on Amazon Prime. And just for like trigger warning type of stuff.
Gotta have like everyone.
There is an animal death in the movie, so.
Oh, that's right.
That would be like the lowest on my list.
It's a great scene, actually.
See, I'm one of these people. You could feed humans through a treat, where there's wood chipper things. Feet first, and I don't give a shit. I'm like, but don't you dare touch a hair on that little cat.
I mean, you could consider that there's like quite a lot of animal cruelty in it, just depending on how you define
animals. Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, Claire, Vincenzo, thank you so much. Now, Claire, if they want to find out more about you and any other your writings or the Miskatonic thing up in New York. Now, you're in New York City, is it? I'm
in New York, yeah. Miskatonic is currently headquartered in London.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm in Brooklyn, and I occasionally do, when the situation calls for it, live events in New York. But most often I do these monthly lectures online during the academic year. So go to miskatonicinstitute.com and see what we have coming up. I squat the handle Donner Party of One everywhere that I can with whatever spellings I'm allowed. But it might be easier for you to follow along with the Miskatonic Institute's social media.
Okay. So how does people get a hold of you and find out what you got going on?
I have the Twitter handle Vincenzo Natali, and my Instagram handle is, this is a tricky one, Vincenzopoulos. Probably if you just look up my name. And then I do have this digital archive which is just a pile of scripts and storyboards and all kinds of ephemera related to my films. That is Vincenzo-Natali.com.
All right. And again, I'll put some links in the show notes of this episode or this video. And again, the novelization of Splice come out August 20th of 2024. And go check out the movie. I'm on disability, so it wasn't like, putting me out. It's just not one of these $25 renter things on Amazon. But,
and if you saw it a long time ago, see it again now and see what it does for you. I think that movie sticks around and that it's evolving, and I'm ready for the Splice renaissance that obviously is coming.
Excellent. Well, Claire, Vincenzo, thank you so much for coming on and being in our dungeon. I hope we didn't harm you too permanently. So.
No animals were harmed in the filming of this episode.
Only humans. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll